And now I would like to introduce Nancy Wilsted, who is a women's nurse health practitioner. Nancy, please.
This is a story about the little town where I grew up, a little town in Michigan. And I was really happy to see young people's faces when people were coming in, because I'm 65 and this story is pretty unbelievable to me, so it will certainly be unbelievable to you. And as I've been thinking about it all day, it's had me laughing. My mother figures importantly in this story, and she's living, she's almost 92 years old. And I'll tell you more about her as we go along. The little town where I grew up is Greenville, Michigan. It's about 30 miles northeast of Grand Rapids. When I was growing up there, it was probably under 5,000 people. Kind of a sleepy little town. In Michigan, you have more water than you have land, so even in this little tiny town, there were 3 lakes within the city limits, plus the flat river that ran through the middle of town. The Main Street was very much like the Main Street in Florence, Colorado, only just a little bit longer. And as small children, we lived in the street directly behind Main Street, so it was just really not even a full block to walk to Main Street. And one of our favorite things was to break away from home and to get to go downtown, which people would laugh at, but it was our version of downtown. There was a little Sears Roebuck. It really wasn't much more than a kiosk. But the Sears Roebuck catalogs figured very importantly in my life, because that was the way, it was the dream book, that was the way people lived, was through this catalog. And we had looked at it, it was just dog-eared. And my little friend Barbie house from down the street and I loved to get away, and because there wasn't really any room, all of the bathtubs and sinks and water heaters sat outside on the sidewalk. And so we would climb into the bathtub and we would be, bathing, and we'd be pretending to wash each other's hair and yell at each other, sit still, you're going to get soap in your eyes. And, and then the person who ran the Sears Roebuck store, Einar Jorgensen, would call one of our mothers and we would be retrieved and get sent home. This town was originally Menominee and Potawatomi Indians, and then in about 1850, there were some Danish immigrants who came, and they were looking for farmland, because Danes are farmers by and large. And they could not have found better farmland. And I think they must have also looked around. Maybe they visited in wintertime and said, oh yes, this place is every bit as depressing as Denmark. The mosquitoes are just as big. The mosquitoes are big enough to wear a backpack and fly. And so we're going to live here. So this little town was originally referred to as the Great Dane Settlement. Not the Great Dane dog, but the Great Dane Settlement. And so the town was primarily Danish, and by the time I was born, which was in 1946, it was much more mixed. And I'm always fascinated to know how people learn prejudice, because I'd like to tell you the prejudice that I learned. I learned that Danes are superior to everyone. Absolutely everyone. If you can't be Danish, then you must at least have the courtesy to be Scandinavian. If you can't be Scandinavian, then we've heard of people like you. We've heard that sometimes some of you survive. And good luck with that. That's pretty much the way it went. And some people have asked me, well, were there people of color in the town where you lived? And I said, absolutely, but we never got to that. That was a non-issue. It was all about this competition among Northern European countries, mostly. My family owned a business. My parents had grown up really painfully poor, both of them, and they owned a furniture business. They started out with a little business in what had been a barn, used furniture. Then they moved downtown, and then they moved to a store north of town. And they were, I think my father's experience with poverty had been that it gave him something to overcome. He was not going to be poor again. In my mother's case, I think the experiences that she had were more defeating and more humiliating. And so she was always afraid of becoming poor again. My parents were good parents, they were good people, they were great business partners. That really was their focus growing up. I had one older brother, and we would sometimes hear Mom and Dad downstairs arguing. And we had these registers in these old houses, and we'd go and lay on the floor and listen, and we'd think, oh, they're arguing about us, and they're arguing about the dog or the house or whatever. They were never arguing about those things. And they were certainly never arguing about sex, because their bedroom was directly below mine, and I can attest to that fact. What they were arguing about was business decisions, and my dad was the accelerator, and my mother was the brakes. And they needed each other, but it was difficult because they were both very ambitious. Well, they owned this furniture store, and my dad loved promotions. And in small towns, people have to amuse themselves, and they sometimes do some very strange things. And so he loved, and you never had heard of the word marketing, I'm sure, but he loved promotions. So they'd have these crazy promotions. He'd have this promotion where he'd say, I've been a donkey's behind and bought too many sofa beds, and then he'd be in the newspaper with a picture of him and a donkey and the sofa bed. This went on all the time. So every year at Christmas, they imported from the Chicago furniture market this 6-foot-tall stocking. They went to furniture market twice a year, and unlike this dinky little town, when they went to Chicago, it was the big city and the bright lights. They stayed at the Palmer House, they ate at Diamond Jim's, and they shopped at Marshall Field's. I still remember the green packaging from the Marshall Field's items, because they would bring presents home to us. And we were always very excited to see what was going to be in those packages. The Christmas stocking was a promotion they did every year, and they did a giveaway. And in this stocking was everything you can imagine that a kid would want. There usually was a guitar or a ukulele, usually a Gene Autry brand, a doll, coloring books, board games, guns, because metal guns for kids were very popular then. And they held a drawing. It was always held the Saturday before Christmas. You had to be present to win. It was smart on my father's part, because everybody came into the store the Saturday before Christmas, and of course they wouldn't go out without a new chair or lamp or whatever. So I enjoyed seeing this promotion every year, and sometimes I'd go out on the truck. Mom would say, well, do you want to ride out with the boys? That's how they referred to the guys that drove the trucks. And do you want to go out and deliver the stocking? Of course, that was fun. Who doesn't want to give a gift? And it was, I didn't go every year, but I thought, but I did go enough times to see, it seemed like, gosh, this is great, because the family where we're delivering this really, it's great, they can use it. They don't have very much, and the kids will get such a charge out of this gift. So, and we all worked in the store. This was a family business. My brother repaired furniture and went out on the truck, and I dusted. And by the time I was 12, I had dusted more furniture than most people have ever seen in their entire lives. And I came by my dust allergy, honestly. So the years went by, and they did this every year, even after us kids went away. They did this promotion with the stocking, and then years later they retired. And I was in Arizona one time with my mom and talking about it, and I said, it was so great how it always turned out that whoever got that stocking really was a family that needed it. And she kind of looked. My mother has the face of an angel, so she can't hide anything. And I said, what's going on? And she said, well, Eileen, who was the store secretary, and she was like a family member, Eileen and I decided every year ahead of time who this would go to, because there were always families that would come in and be paying $3 a week or $5 a week on a $59 sofa bed. And so she said, we decided ahead of time, and the only thing we had to do was make sure that whoever we had decided on was actually in the store the day that the drawing was done. And I said, well, how did you do that? And she said, well, don't you remember that it was always a child younger, who was too young to read, that we would have come up on and so she said, this little child would pull the hat, the name up, and she said, I would read the agreed upon name. I would turn it over to Eileen so that it looked very official. Eileen would write it in the book, although it was the name that they had agreed upon. And that's how the gift would go to the appropriate family. And that's one of the reasons that I so dearly love my mother. Thank you.